Welcome to Kids Doc Talk with Dr. Jennie. Dr. Jennie is a board-certified pediatrician and is the Director of Telemedicine at Pediatric Associates.
Welcome to Kids Doc Talk with Dr. Jennie. Today's episode is with guest Blimie Heller, who's a parenting coach, where we talk about a different way to discipline. Blimie Heller is a mom who's passionate about helping parents build relationships with their children based on respect and trust. Welcome, Blimie.
Hi, Blimie. Welcome.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you. I've been a fan for a very long time, and I'm so excited to get to talk to you today and ask some questions I have, probably questions a lot of people have about unconditional parenting. So to start off with, what is that? What's unconditional parenting?
That's a great question. And the truth is, I'll tell you the truth, I don't really love that the parenting that I talk about even has a title. Because I don't even know if I agree with the idea of like a specific way of parenting or having titles around our parenting. I think that parenting is not really a method. It's not a science. It's not something where you're like, oh, here's the recipe. And it sort of sounds like that when we give titles to things. And really parenting is an art, and it's so much about being intuitive and about attunement. And so really, the only reason why I give it a title is only because I think for so long our parenting has, first of all, we've been giving parenting titles for so many years. Like people have been, trademarking their parenting approach or whatever. But also for so many years, parenting has been conditional. So I think in the past, the way that we would go about parenting is it would be, even though we would say, oh, I love you unconditionally, or, things like that, the methods that we would use or the strategies that we would use would end up sometimes making our children feel like, actually, we don't love them unconditionally. It's kind of conditional, because what is love? Love is actions. At the end of the day, our children don't experience, love, or anybody doesn't experience love. It's just like, oh, I love you, and therefore you experience the love. You experience love through actions. And so our actions send a message. And so sometimes our actions aren't very loving. And so unconditional parenting is really about constantly and consistently being conscious of how our actions are affecting our children and their experience of our love for them.
I think people really need to give labels. I mean, to all things, right? We know that, not necessarily parenting, but that totally resonates with me, that you just want to call it parenting and sort of like, right,
Exactly.
intuitive parenting. But I think people really love the idea of like, oh, how do you parent? Do you like the reward and punishment? Oh, do you guys do timeouts, right? Oh, you guys don't do timeouts, right? And I think people just kind of want to like box their approaches, because it's just sort of like a mental shortcut and easier for us to think about it and to explain. And you're sort of challenging that, saying like, no, we don't need a label. Like just do the thing, right? Like just be
Kind of.
be
I
the
mean,
kind
you're
of
right.
parent you
No,
want.
you're right. I think that like we create order out of chaos when we give labels to things, right? Yeah. But also I want parents to recognize that like, it's not about following somebody else's strategy for you. Like, I think we get caught up in thinking like, oh, it's a science. Oh, I need to follow this. And if I do what she says or he says, or, then I'm going to have success, or then I'm going to be a good parent. And I really think it's so much more complex than that. And of course, there's amazing wisdom out there. And I have so much to share with parents, but at the end of the day, it's really about the parent and child and their relationship, right? And taking the concepts that resonate with you and work for you, and not about adopting somebody else's strategies or somebody else's whole mindset for
Yeah.
your parenting.
I love that. It's super nuanced. And yeah, I think we just try to simplify it, and maybe this isn't something that can or should be simplified. What drove you to like explore this concept?
Yeah. So originally the seeds of it started when I was a child myself. Yeah. So, in my day growing up, punishments and rewards and like that way of parenting and like, giving a children a threat. Well, people say, well, it wasn't really a threat. They would just say, this is going to be the consequence of your actions, was
Right.
very, very, very common. And that's how I was raised. And I remember even and also in school, they did the same thing, where all the adults treated children the same way, sort of, when I was growing up. And I remember even as a child feeling very disrespected by it, feeling very like, why am I treated less than? Or why am I constantly being controlled? Or why I didn't like it at all. I really remember from a very young age finding it unfair and thinking this doesn't make any sense. And so those were the seeds when I was like, when I'm a parent, I don't think I'm going to be doing this. I didn't know what I was going to do though, but I was just like, and so then that's what happened. I became a parent and I tried not to do the things that I didn't like that were done to me. But then at the same time, I didn't know what to do. So I ended up doing a lot of the same things. Threats were my favorite thing. That's what I did. That was like my MO, for parenting. My child didn't listen to me, didn't do what I wanted her to do. Oh, then I'm going to take away this. I'm going to take away that. You're not going to get this, And I did punish and I put my child in timeout because I didn't know what else to do, and I kind of started hating parenting because I was like, I don't enjoy what I'm doing. I don't enjoy the way I'm interacting with my child. I'm completely doing something that I don't even believe in. And it just became dreadful. And also it wasn't really working. My child, my oldest, as I always say, like she's a gift because she's so strong-willed. And so like the regular strategies of like timeouts or punishing, where some kids would really, their behavior would change very quickly when you do these kinds of things. With her, it was not like that. She would push back and think we could have power struggles for hours at a time. And so that also really drove me over the edge. I don't know if I would have changed just by like, feeling uncomfortable with my parenting. I think that her really being like, this is not going to work, kind of really pushing back is what forced me. I felt so lost that I started researching parenting and I started being like, I'm going to figure out how to do this. And eventually I came across information that blew my mind from like neuroscientists to developmental psychologists. And they were sharing a bunch of things that I find, well, it was about, how many years ago was it? It was like 8-9 years ago. Now these concepts are becoming so popular, but back then it was not as popular, not nearly as popular, even though developmental psychologists had known this for quite a while. The behavioristic sort of parenting, which is all based on the science of behaviorism, which is all about like rewards and punishments to try to get the behavior that you want. That was much more popular. That was still very much the dominant way of parenting. And I think it probably still is somewhat.
I think it absolutely still is, because I'm just thinking like for my training, right? I'm a general pediatrician. So a lot of what we talk about is parenting strategies and trying to empower parents, right? To raise their children or to modify their behavior. And it's still very much focused on reward. We don't like to use the word punishment, but like the big thing for us is positive reinforcement, which I think is just a nicer way of saying reward and punishment, right? If you do the thing that we don't want you to do, we ignore it, which sometimes can be a way of punishment, right? And when you do the thing that we want you to do, you get a sticker or a toy or a high five or some comment, right? That's going to make you feel good. And the thing that always made me a little bit uncomfortable about it, even though it's still very much the mainstream recommendation, is that it does seem very conditional, right? I'm only going to give you the love, the attention, the whatever, when you do the thing that I want you to do. So when you go in the potty, yay, you're amazing, good job going in the potty. And when you have an accident, so I don't want to yell at you because that's mean, but I'm going to ignore it. And isn't that kind of in a way withholding, right, love and attention and all the things that we know kids need on a regular basis? So I would argue that it's still very much the mainstream, this like conventional, like reward and punishment sort of approach.
Yeah, so it could be maybe in school still and everything like that. It still is. And it's so interesting because the science and research has really, really been showing. That's what I'm saying. All these developmental psychologists have known for a while already that this is not really what's best for children. They already know the effects that it has on children, but I guess it still is very, what I'm talking about is like, let's say I guess in the social media world, it's not anymore so dominant. I think it's considered more like archaic and like, oh, no one does it anymore, Yeah.
I think the tides are turning, and I think that's just like the society we live in now, where like maybe things start out in the outside world and in social media, and then it kind of, trickles down into more, evidence-based recommendations. So maybe let's talk a little bit about that like reward punishment approach. Because let's say someone's using it and they're like, well, it works great. That's, sticker charts. I love sticker charts. That's how I get my kids to brush their teeth and get off the screen and go in the potty and stop the passy. Like, what's wrong with that? So why is it a problem? Why do we need to challenge that?
Yeah. So I want to start by saying that I'm not the authority on parenting, right? I don't know what's wrong or right. I don't know what's best for children. But I do know how I would want to be treated. And I also know what makes sense for human beings based on myself, based on how I work and how other people I know work, right? So based on like the fundamental ideas about humanity. And so that's where my, understanding or my passion comes from with this. So again, yes, rewards and punishments do work. That's why there's so much, research behind it. And that's why it's pushed so much, because it does get us the results we want. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. But the thing is like this, is that for me, I worry because children are so much more than just the behavior that they engage in. And when we only focus on the behavior, we're kind of missing the whole entire person. But more than that, we're really missing what's so crucial, which is the relationship that we have with them. And all the research shows that the relationship that we have with our children is the single most influential factor for like their emotional health, mental health, for their actually even physical health. There's tons of research on this. So relationships are at the core of our health, really. And so when we use rewards and punishments, it can very often infringe on the quality of our relationship with our children. Like you said, it's very conditional. And so then the child can learn, you love me when I do this, but you don't love me when I do that. Or I get the attention and love that I need when I do this, and I don't get it when I do that. And so then they start being very careful. They try to sort of have to jump through hoops to get the love that all of us need, to get the affection, the connection that all of us need. They have to jump through hoops. And in doing that, first of all, they can't rest in our love. And we all know that resting in love is actually, like I said, at the cornerstone of so much of our health. Also, it's what allows children to then grow in the best way possible. But besides for the fact that they can't rest, they also lose their authenticity. Because if I'm constantly just focused, see, children need connection. They need it for survival, right? They need love. We all do. But children, especially because they depend on us. And if we don't love them, they're worried that their needs won't get met. Okay. So they depend on us. And if they're worried that they need to connect with us, then they're going to do whatever they can to make sure that they're going to get that love. And then they can lose themselves along the way. For example, I'm just going to give you an example. Let's say we tell a child's having a tantrum. That's an authentic expression of themselves. They're having a hard time, they're expressing it. But let's say we were told like, oh no, in order for children to learn to stop tantruming, you need to, when they're having a tantrum, you need to ignore them.
You walk away, right?
Walk away or whatever. Yeah. Now, as soon as you do that, alarm bells go off in the child's mind. Oh my gosh, my parents leaving. They sense the feeling of abandonment. It triggers that very quickly in them. And so they'll be like, oh, what do I need to do now to get my parents' love? Some children will actually scream even louder and more boisterous, and some children go inward and they shut it down. And they're like, and so what happens is, in that case of a child who shuts it down, now we're basically cutting off their connection with themselves a little bit. And over time, they learn not to express themselves or not even to be connected to what's happening inside of themselves, because they have learned that I need to do this in order to get what I want from my parent, in order to get the love that I need from my parent. So that's just a few things that can be, but there's really like layers upon layers and upon layers of things that really end up not being in the best interest of the child long term. Meaning in the moment, it can be so enticing because it's so hard as parents. We need to get our children to do things. And all day we're just like trying to get them to do this and do that. And they're not motivated to do it themselves. And so it can be frustrating and it can be exhausting. And so it can seem like this is such a quick fix. If I just give them a punishment or if I just reward them, they're going to do it. And the thing is that we have to remember that parenting is really for the long term. Like, of course, there's things during the day in the short term that need to get done. But ultimately, it's about creating a foundation for your children's life. We know that the most impactful time in a person's life is their childhood. That's literally when their brain and body is being formed. And so everything we do during that time is much more impactful than the rest of their lives. Their lives is also impactful, but childhood is the most impactful. Everybody knows that. And so we really want to remember that, like, what they're learning in childhood, what they're absorbing in childhood, everything about them that's being formed in childhood is going to impact for the long term. And so we want to keep that in mind instead of only focusing on the short term and being like, well, it gets me the results I want, but at what cost? At what cost?
Yeah. One of the things that I really love on your social media that I often really resonates with me is, like, you give an example, right, of like, whatever, right? Child's tantruming and they don't want to put their coat on. And we're like, no, you got to put on your coat. Like, right. We stuff them in the jacket and we take them out the door. And then the next carousel is like how that child sort of translates that later on, like 5 years later, right? Now they're 6. And so now when they don't want to do something, they know they really, really have to. And so they suppress sort of what their own intuition is telling them. And then later on, how that impacts them in adulthood. So I love the idea of sort of thinking long-term, right? Parenting is the long game, which is obviously so much harder to do, right? Because when you're in a hurry out the door, like, it's so hard to stop and be like, okay, how is it going to impact my child, right? When they're a teenager, instead of just being like, oh my gosh, I'm late for work, we got to stuff them in the coat. So I think that's probably the challenge. And that's where a lot of resistance to this approach comes from.
Yeah, exactly. And it is a challenge. And I want to say that I have so much compassion for all of us in that. Like, I also sometimes am in a rush and I'm like, I don't have time for this. And guess what? I
Right.
always say, like, there's room for that. There's room for mistakes. There's room for us just being in a rush and not having this. Like, being in a rush, I think, is the worst thing for parenting. And sometimes we just are. And then we don't end up acting in an ideal way. Neither do I. Like, we're human, you know? So it's more about, for me, it's more about, as in general, changing our whole approach and our mindset and our attitude and our strategies towards things. And then, of course, having the like regular everyday, you know, mishaps, or, you know, that we don't navigate things in the best way, those will happen. And that's okay. I think it's overall about the approach and the mindset that we have. Really, I find that most of this is about changing our mindset around things and having a certain sensitivity and awareness that maybe we didn't have before.
So, listen, I'm a parent of young children, and there's probably other parents of young children listening, and I'm thinking that this is great. This also, yes, I want to do this. I want to have this like really strong relationship with my kids and have this collaborative approach, but I still need them to learn to use the potty, right? So, does that mean that I'm having these like intellectual conversations with them at when they're 2, 2.5, to be like, listen, it's important, but if you're not ready right now, that's okay too. Is that really kind of practically, how does this work?
Yeah. So, there's so many practical ideas of how this works. But no, a lot of people, with the feedback I get the most from people is they say, this approach sounds like your children, you have to ask your children permission for everything and you have to explain everything. And I always say, like, actually, in real life, that's really not what it looks like a lot of the time. We very much still believe in like being the leader and sometimes saying, like, this is what needs to get done and not explaining. But yes, we do welcome feelings. That's the difference. People think we explain, but by the way, I'm not against explaining at all. I love explaining things to my kids. I think that the whole entire point of childhood is to learn about everything. And so, of course, I'm going to explain, but not necessarily in the moment of resistance. When they're resisting me, that's not the best time to explain because their resistance is a feeling. It's coming from, I don't want to. It's not becoming because they need my explanations. And my explanations, I find, it's the wrong time. So, but we do welcome feelings. So let's say a child says, I don't want to. I don't want to do this. And we say, oh, yeah, you really don't want to. It's hard to do things when you don't. So we welcome the feelings, but we insist and we say, it's really important. Come, let's do it. And we have a sense of like confident leadership where we're not afraid of our child's feeling. And we're also, we don't, we don't go into this like panicked space of like, oh my gosh, they're not going to listen to me. What am I going to do? I mean, of course we sometimes do, and that's okay. We welcome that in ourselves, but we don't get stuck there. And we sort of go back to this place of like, I'm the parent. This is my child. My job is to lead and I'm going to lead them. And children really respond well to that. So that's usually how we navigate things. Now, the potty is a whole separate topic because I find that what happened I don't know if it's because of behaviorism or what it is, but a lot of things that really children naturally will adopt and learn, we have made it into something that we need to teach our children how to do. I saw the best quote, and I don't remember who wrote this, but this is just to show you what I'm talking about. He says, if we would take children and put them into schools to learn how to walk, within one generation, everybody would be sending their kids to school to learn how to walk. And so that's for me, that was so impactful because it's so true for so many things. Some things children do need us to teach them, absolutely. But so many things are natural development that eventually a child outgrows it and wants to do differently and wants to adopt different strategies. Like walking, nobody has to teach a child how to walk. Yes, you have to expose a child to it. You have to give a child room to explore, right? All those things. But eventually a child is going to, most children, now if some need more support, but they're going to learn how to walk. So it's the same thing with a potty, really. It's more about talking about it, exposing them to it, giving them room to try and to practice whenever they want to, and really following their lead, because eventually all children, or most children, maybe some need more support, will say, okay, that's what I did with my children. I never potty trained them. We never did the prizes, the rewards. I waited. We practiced a lot. We would go in the bathroom. We'd make it a thing. My child, most of the time, didn't even use it, but they would just sit on it and say, oh, I made, and they didn't really. And then eventually my child said, actually did do it. And then after enough times of trying it, she said, I don't want to wear my diaper anymore. And that was it. And a lot of parents do it this way and realize like, oh, I really don't have to do it that way. I really don't have to like train them, so we train kids to do a lot of things that they would do anyway. Now, they do end up doing it later if we do it that way, sometimes later than like usual. But I find it actually ends up being, I work with so many parents whose children have, and you probably as a doctor see this a lot. Constipation issues. A lot of children have it. And I find it's because they start too young and the child is still too afraid to use the bathroom, but they've sort of made their child, have to be ready. And so then it creates issues with the child that holds it in, and then they have constipation, and then it creates a whole cycle. This is very common, but parents who wait usually don't have these issues because the child feels ready, completely ready. Sometimes even though they're physically ready, they're not emotionally ready. They're still afraid of the toilet, or like, how big it is or whatever it is. So, but again, some people are like, we can't wait because the play group or the place we're sending them.
A lot of these rules are absolutely like socially imposed, self-imposed, right? So from a pediatrician approaching childcare or potty training, we always say like the first step, how do you know like when it's time to start potty training? I always say the first step is the child expresses readiness, right? And that can manifest in different ways, like interest in the potty, expressing interest that they need privacy when they need to use the bathroom, and all those things. And that can happen at all different ages, and that's totally okay. But unfortunately, we have these socially imposed restrictions, like playgroup or school, or the babysitter session not changing diapers anymore, right? Or maybe you have another kid that's younger that's already expressing interest, so you're like, oh my gosh, what are people going to think? My oldest one's still in diapers, but my younger one's already potty trained. And so I think a lot of the anxiety around it probably stems from that.
Exactly. It does. It's socially imposed norms, even though there really isn't. Development, like we know, is so different for every child. Yeah.
For sure. So I'm just thinking, okay, so I'm, again, a parent of young kids, and I have multiple young kids. And so this all sounds great with child number one. But now we have child number 2 and 3 and so on. So how do I navigate this like loving, nurturing relationship when there's more than one and there's a conflict between the two of them? So probably a lot of what you get asked about is like sibling relationships and rivalry and things like that.
Yeah. So sibling relationships is, it's actually fairly simple, the strategy, but it's complicated, meaning like it's hard. In real life, it's really hard to talk about, to implement the strategies that I talk about, but it's actually fairly simple. And, it really relies on a lot of the different concepts that I share about generally. And so what happens with conflict is that a lot of times we as parents come in as like the judge and the juror, and we're like, you're right and you're wrong, and you did it first and you didn't do it first, or like you give him this and he give him that. And we sort of, I find that we do too much. So first of all, we take on too much of the responsibility, but also what ends up happening is that one of the children usually feels slighted. Like, why is my mother choosing, or my father choosing, this sibling over me? Why is what I wanted more important? I used to do this all the time, and it ended up in a disaster. You like this sibling better than me. And it happens, well, that's when as they get older, they sort of develop those ideas. So I see our job as being the facilitator. And so what that means is that we sort of just help everything to slow everything down a little bit, to listen. Really what we're doing is we're trying to do what we hope that they're going to do eventually later on when they're older. So we listen to each person and what's going on for them. Now, sometimes they might want to talk on top of each other, or they might want to, and so we slow down, we stop them, and we say, I'm going to listen to each one of you. Let's take one person at a time. Sometimes I used to even do this. I used to give like each child something to hold on to and like pass it around. And when you're holding it, then you talk. If you don't have it, you don't. And first we listen. And when you listen, you empathize. So the child says, I want that toy first. It's not fair that I can't, right? And so you say, yeah, you really want that toy, but she's using it. And then you turn to the other one and say, what's going on for you? Another child says, but I said I'm having it first. And then she took it. But I said Have you
been to my house? This
happens in every house.
A script that happens in my house all the time.
Yeah, I think it happens in every home. And so you say, yeah. And then you listen to each one. And then you say, so you want this and you wanted this. What do we do? And you actually help them solve the problem with you. Instead of you thinking of all the solutions, you help them. And this is such a beautiful way to navigate it, because like I said, you're helping them really with all conflict in their life in the future. It's about listening to each side and then coming up with something together. But each of us needs to hear each other out. We can't just jump to solutions first. And so this is what I do. I try to facilitate it and say, what makes the most sense? What can we do? Now, of course, there are general rules like with sharing. If somebody has something first, it's theirs, just like it works in the real world. It's not because you have something, just because another person wants it, you don't have to give it up and give it to them. If I'm using the computer and my husband wants it, he's going to wait until I'm done, right? He's not just going to be like, well, 5 minutes and now I'm finishing what I'm doing. Sure, you can have it. Now, will I be considerate of him maybe and try to finish quicker or not do as many things as I wanted to do? Maybe I can do that. And so that's the general rule of sharing in my house. and a lot of parents' homes, is that, yeah, we if a child has something, they have it first. We're going to wait till they're done. Now we could say, oh, the other one really wants it. When do you think you'll be done? Can you give them a timeline? And you can teach them to be more considerate of the other child. But at the end of the day, that's how sharing works for me. And I think that that's really such a great way. Like I said, that's how it works in the real world.
Right.
I find that with children, we just force them to share.
I love that your whole approach is like, the rules aren't changing, right? Like, it's like whatever you need to do, the rules don't change, but you give space for feeling and like for the child to express how they feel about the rules. And a lot of what I think I'm sort of getting from you is like you have to validate their feelings, because feelings are new for them too, and they don't really understand how to explain or navigate what they're feeling. So even like naming their feelings or having somebody validate them, I think is probably the biggest takeaway for me, as opposed to like getting them to do the thing. You'll still get them to do the thing, or maybe you'll decide that the thing isn't so important once you hear their feelings about it. But ultimately, you don't have to worry about changing the rules and like having the kid dictate what the rules are.
Absolutely. Exactly. That is spot on. Yeah. That's people a lot of times have this idea that like children dictate it. It's like, no, you're the leader. You're the parent. You decide. Again, you can be open to your child's input. Just because someone's a leader doesn't mean they're not open to the people who are underneath them, their input, right? If you're an employer, a good employer is open to the input of their employees, but they still don't make the rules. The employer is the one who does. So as a parent, you have the final say. You're the one who decides, but you are open to your children's input. I love collaborating with my children, but ultimately I'm the one who has the final say. And sometimes I'm not open to collaboration. Sometimes I'm like, no, this is but feelings. Exactly. And let's talk about feelings. There's so much to say on feelings, right? So like you said, our feelings are sensations in our bodies. Unpleasant feelings can feel very, very unsafe in our body and can feel very unpleasant in our body, very uncomfortable. And children, we have to remember, like, their feelings are new for them. They don't know what they are. They suddenly are overtaken by this really unpleasant sensation and they don't know what to do with it, right? And sometimes they feel scared by it, and sometimes they feel really like it just becomes like larger than life, and it causes them to want to lash out or to hit or whatever. And what they need is, first of all, to recognize that feelings are safe. Like, they're not scary. They're fine. How do we help children understand that their feelings are safe? Is what you said, by naming them, right? Because then when we name it, what they call it, I think Dr. Dan Siegel says it, name it to tame it. It's like, when you name it, it's like, oh, that's what it is. Okay, it's a sensation in my body that feels like this. Oh,
right.
Okay.
Nothing has gone wrong. That's the other thing I want to like always reinforce, is that like whenever there's a tantrum or an outburst, like nothing has gone wrong. That's a normal, healthy expression of discomfort at this, right? It's an age appropriate, right?
Yes.
Normal expression of discomfort, right? When I'm angry as an adult, sometimes I'll act angry and nothing has gone wrong. That's like a healthy feeling, right?
Exactly. As a culture, we have such a hard time with unpleasant emotions, because most of us from a very young age have been real. When we expressed an unpleasant emotion or felt an unpleasant emotion, even, we would get all kinds of things. Stop that attitude right now. Go to your room. And there was a very little room. It was like something has gone wrong. The message that we got is something is very wrong with your feeling right now. Get rid of it, make it go away, or something. And so many of us have a very tenuous relationship with our own uncomfortable emotions, and then our children express uncomfortable, and we think, oh, something has gone wrong. I need to fix this. I need to make this go away. What do I do? And some parents, I even work with adults whose parents were actually really loving and would rescue their child from their unpleasant emotions. So the child would feel an unpleasant emotion. The parent would say, oh, come, let's bake cookies, or right in some way. And then these children, people think like, oh, that's such a great strategy. Actually, it's not. These children a lot of times grow up and they have a lot of anxiety, and they also feel like they can't express unpleasant emotions to their parent because their parent immediately goes to fix it.
Right away, you have to fix it. Yeah.
Exactly. So either way you look at it, really the best thing we can do with feelings is just be there for it. It's okay. Nothing went wrong. You feel that feeling. Wow. And what you do by doing that is you help your child be able to tolerate the unpleasant emotion so they don't feel completely distressed by it and unsafe, and then start going into all kinds of irrational behaviors. So this is a huge piece of this parenting, is to simply give our children the sense of, you're safe. You're okay. Yeah. You feel that unpleasant emotion. Wow. That is unpleasant. I'm here. And there's a real sense of safety that gets connected to that feeling.
I'm thinking that even as an adult, that that's probably sometimes uncomfortable for people because they're also not used to just sitting with their emotions and not reacting, right? That's the other thing is that this is very unreactive. Like you just allow for it to happen and you don't respond or react. You just wait. Just create the space. And I think that can be very uncomfortable and hard.
Yes, yes. I love that you mentioned that because I talk about being there for our children. But what about the parent? What about the parent and their own unpleasant emotion over the fact that their child's having an unpleasant
Right.
emotion? Right. And so a lot of this I find really comes back to parents themselves learning how to just be there with their own emotions. And sometimes we need help with that. Like sometimes I find that it's hard to do that on our own when we've never experienced that. Sometimes we need to go to a therapist or a coach or somebody who can be there with us when we're feeling an unpleasant emotion so that we get to experience ourselves what it's like to just sit with it and for it to be okay. Because a lot of us are very terrified of our unpleasant emotions. I think that the ones that we're most terrified of are shame and hopelessness. Yeah, there's a lot of like, we don't even want to go there because it's so uncomfortable.
Wow. I love this. I feel like I could like keep asking so many questions and we could probably go through tons of examples, but any like kind of major takeaways or anything that you really want to make sure people kind of like walk away from this remembering or
Mm,
knowing.
mm, yeah. Hmm. I think that, okay. I think there's maybe like two major takeaways. So the first one, I touched on it in the beginning, but I really want to mention it again, is this idea that nobody outside of you knows how you should parent and right should. At the end of the day, it's really about relationship, remember? So relationship is about attunement. What attunement means is being um noticing what your child feels and what they need. That's what attunement is at the end of the day. And we didn't even touch on this, but so much about is about needs as well. But when you are connected to what your child feels and what they need, that is you being attuned to them because feelings and needs are beneath the surface. Behavior is what is observable. Behavior is what you can see. So let's say a child goes and hits their sibling. You see them hitting their sibling. That's the behavior. But that is just the tip of the iceberg. If you only address the behavior and say, stop hitting, it's not a nice thing to do, which by the way, it's essential to teach them those things, but you're not addressing the child. You're not really being attuned to them. Attunement is when you look beneath the behavior and say, what was my child feeling and needing? And that's why they hit. There is always a feeling and a need underneath behavior. Some people say, no, there isn't. Sometimes a child does something for no reason. There's no such thing. People, when they say that, I think they get confused because they think a reason means that the child was in pain or something was going, doesn't necessarily mean that. Sometimes the child's bored and looking for stimulation. It's that simple. They're exploring. There's always a need though, always. And so when we can connect to what's going on underneath what the child is behaving or doing, that's attunement. So what that looks like is saying like, oh, were you upset because your brother was taking your stuff and that's why you hit him? That's attunement. You're connecting to what is happening within the child. It's not observable, but the behavior is giving you clues. And then you say, oh, hitting is not okay. It hurts, whatever. Right. But at the end of the day, it's really about you attuning to your specific child and what your child feels and needs. And nobody outside of you can tell you that. And that's why sometimes we want to hear the strategies from other people about what do I do in this moment? How do I do it? And I just wanted to remind you, other people have amazing wisdom. I think I even share about this all the time. But just remember that you as the parent are the only one who can attune to your specific child and know what it is that they need. And sometimes you can be like, this strategy doesn't work for them or they don't like this. Or so I want to remind people to really trust yourself as the child's parent and that you can attune to your child better than somebody outside of you who doesn't know you and your child. And also to consider yourself as the parent. Like I talk about your child's feelings and needs. What about your feelings and needs? As a parent, we also have feelings and needs, and we need to care for that as well and consider that as well. We're not martyrs. We're not, we don't have to be like, oh, I only have to care about my child. No, you can care about yourself too and include yourself too in parenting. And so that's what I want. Hopefully
I
parents.
love that. I love that. So it's so empowering. I think that's like a very empowering message, a beautiful message for parents to hear, to like really stop all the things for a minute, really think, trust yourself, trust your instincts, and put effort into the relationship you have with your child and not necessarily as much emphasis on the behavior that you want to see.
Exactly. I love how you synopsize that.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you so much. I love this. I've learned so much. And thank you so much for sharing all this really beautiful and important information.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciated the questions and the conversation that we had.
Make sure you like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Thank you for joining us on Kids Doc Talk.